Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Cooking with Plants. I'm Kelly Wilson, and tonight we are going to be talking about plant proteins, and we're going to have a special focus on beans and lentils. This is part one. We're going to do another class on plant proteins and dive into soy foods next month. So hopefully you're able to join us for that. A couple housekeeping things before we dive into tonight's content. I just want to remind folks that you can turn on live captions if that's something that would be helpful for you by going to the three dots on the top right of your toolbar where it says more. It opens up a drop-down menu where you can select language and speech options and then turn on live captions, and you should see that text populate right on your screen. You can also ask questions, and I encourage you to do so if they're relevant to the content and the whole group by going to the Q&A function. If you're joining us from a phone or a tablet, unfortunately, you won't see that button in your menu options, but if you're on a laptop or another computer, you should see that Q&A bubble pop up. Type a question in there, and I'll do my best to pay attention and answer that during class. If you're a Trinity Health colleague, you do get points for attending the live classes or watching the recordings towards keeping your insurance premium low, and you get 250 points for every class you attend. All you need to do is email lifestylemedicine@trinity-health.org to get your points. As always, this series is very general in its focus. Most people can benefit from eating these plant foods that we talk about, but there might be some ingredients like some salt or oil that might not be best for you and your health condition. So if you're looking for specific dietary advice, I encourage you to speak with a registered dietitian or talk to your physician. So who is this person that's talking to you if I haven't met you? As I said, my name is Kelly Wilson. I'm a registered dietitian and board certified lifestyle medicine practitioner. I'm based in Southeast Michigan at Trinity Health Ann Arbor in our lifestyle medicine department. Lifestyle medicine is this really cool medical subspecialty that focuses on disease treatment, reversal, and prevention through 6 key pillars. We focus on a whole food, plant forward dietary pattern. That's what we focus on in this class. Moving your body daily, getting restorative sleep, avoiding risky substances, connecting with other people, and managing stress in healthful ways. So, our team and other certified lifestyle medicine practitioners use those pillars to help our patients and our communities make sustainable, lifelong change that positively influences their health and prevents disease. I'm really excited that I get to focus on culinary skill building and share this class with you all because I really think that cooking can be intimidating for a lot of people. A lot of our patients feel like they need fancy equipment or expensive ingredients. And I hope that this class helps show you that one, anybody can cook, no matter where you're starting from. You can build skills to make delicious, tasty food. And you don't have to have fancy ingredients or fancy, expensive tools in order to make basic food delicious. So hopefully you feel that way by the end of tonight's class and the end of this series. A few reminders, the recipes that we share in this class series, they're always suggestions. If you don't have an ingredient, I'll try to remind you about options that you can swap in and out. You can get creative on your own as well and swap out things you don't have a taste for yet with some foods that maybe you already enjoy. And if you are new to this whole food, plant forward way of eating, I encourage you to start with what you know. So start with a recipe that you love and you already know how to make, and see what you can do to add some more plant foods into that. Say you're a scrambled egg person. Can you throw some spinach or some chopped tomatoes in that? Or are you a taco person? Can you mix your taco meat with half lentils? We'll talk about that a little bit later today too. And then Remember to be kind to yourself and set bite-sized goals. The science around habit change does show that when we take small, consistent steps, that's much more successful than when we try to go cold turkey and change everything all at once. So pick one thing and be persistent and focus on progress over being perfect, right? Think of that 80-20 rule and just treat yourself with compassion because any change takes time to stick. This is the class series schedule. So if you haven't been able to join us for other classes, everything is recorded. And if you scan that QR code, that'll take you to the registration page so that I have your email and I can share the class website and the links to all of the recordings. And you can also see kind of where we're going for future classes. So hopefully you're able to tune in and join us for future sessions. Once you register once, you do not need to register again. So if you're here tonight and you filled out that form, no worries about scanning that QR code and signing up again. Tonight, we are going to focus, like I said, on plant protein. So I'm going to go through a couple frequently asked questions that our team gets often when we're talking about plant proteins. We're going to talk about legumes, like what they are, what the benefits of them are, and then we're going to go through 3, 4, if we have time, recipes that use different types of legumes. So what you're seeing here on the screen now are a few of the questions our team gets asked a lot when we're talking to folks about the whole food, plant-forward way of eating. People are like, okay, well, where am I going to get my protein from? Like, can I get enough? I've heard that I need to maybe combine proteins in order to make a complete protein. Is that a thing? And is it okay for me to eat soy? So we'll talk through each of those. And hopefully, if these are questions you have, answer them by the end of class. So first and foremost, can you get enough protein? The short answer is yes. Now, I will say that protein needs vary by age, gender, and activity level. So what you need might be different than the person next to you, okay? The dietary guidelines, the RDA, the recommended dietary allowance, for most people is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. And for active people or for folks who are older than 60, that recommendation is 1.2 grams per kilogram. I'm sharing those numbers. You don't need to run out and calculate all of that for you, but just as a reference point. And I do want to emphasize that for most people, we can really easily meet our protein needs just by having a varied diet. All of the plant foods that we talk about in these class have some protein in them. Some just have a little bit more, like the beans and the lentils that we're going to talk about tonight. So if you're including a wide variety of plant-based foods in your daily meals and including things like beans, legumes, soy, nuts, and seeds, you're likely meeting and exceeding your protein needs without even thinking about it. For example, let's look at this grain bowl that's on the screen here. That's what this table is breaking down. Say you made a delicious grain bowl with a base of brown rice. So you've got half a cup, and maybe actually you're eating a little bit more than a half a cup. So you've got at least 5 grams of protein. You throw in some delicious black beans. That's another 7 grams of protein. Got some savory roasted broccoli. You're just going to sprinkle some pumpkin seeds on top of that. And maybe you're throwing some salsa or some type of your favorite dressing on top of that. Adding that all up, you're going to get to 19 grams of protein. Okay, so most folks, if you're aiming for that like 20 grams of protein per meal, you're going to meet or exceed what you need. So that was pretty easy to stack that up without even really thinking too much about maximizing our protein intake. So hopefully that helps kind of ease some of the fear there. The other question we get asked a lot is about combining proteins. There used to be this school of thought that, if you were eating plant-based proteins like beans, you needed to combine them with grains. And that's because proteins are comprised of these building blocks called amino acids. There's 20 of them, and we can synthesize 11 of them, but the other 9 we need to get from nature. And all plant foods contain these 9 essential amino acids, but some are lower or higher in some of them than others. So, for example, grains are a little bit lower in lysine, and beans are a little bit lower in methionine. So the old school of thought meant that we thought that we needed to combine the beans and the grains to get that complete protein. We now know that our body actually maintains an amino acid pool. And so as long as we're eating a wide variety of foods, beans and lentils and whole grains included throughout the day, throughout the week, we have all of the tools that we need to build the proteins that our body needs for repair and muscle building. So don't worry about combining foods in every meal. Just eat a variety of whole plant foods, and you don't even have to worry about this. Right. Finally, what about soy? So when we talk about soy, I like to give the caveat that we're talking about whole food soy. I'm not talking about textured vegetable protein or frozen processed veggie burgers. I'm talking about things like tofu, tempeh, edamame, which you see here pictured on the screen. And those are all foods that we're going to focus on in next month's class. But those soy foods in their whole form are actually health promoting. So there's been a lot of research around soy and human health, and some of the controversy around what we hear around soy is really due to one, the type of soy that's being studied. Is it whole food soy or is it processed soy? And is the study being done in animals, or is the study looking at human dietary patterns over long periods of time? And when we look at whole food soy in human studies, especially those long-term longitudinal studies or population level studies, we see that soy foods, whole food soy foods, have a health promoting or a neutral effect. Okay. And those health promoting effects are due to things like phytoestrogens. So those are plant based estrogens. Phyto means plant, that kind of mimic estrogen. But what's cool about them is that they don't bind the same receptors in our body as our endogenous, so the estrogen that we naturally produce. So they're actually protective against cancer like breast cancer, and they don't promote cancer like some of the internal estrogen might. They can also potentially prevent prostate cancer and the reoccurrence of both of those types of cancers. There's also a really cool phytoestrogen, genistein, that is protective of our heart health because it can help lower cholesterol, and it increases our body's ability to internally produce antioxidants that prevent cell damage and ultimately lead to lowered inflammation. And you probably know that a lot of internal inflammation is a root of a lot of illness and pain. So when we're lowering our inflammation, we're lowering our risk for disease. Soy foods are also chock full of vitamin B6, which is a really important tool for the reaction of taking tryptophan, which is one of those amino acids, and turning it into serotonin, that feel good brain chemical, and then further transforming serotonin into melatonin, which is that hormone that helps us have a restful sleep. I think another question that folks ask around soy is whether it's safe if you have hypothyroid issues. And the long-term studies show no issue with consuming soy several times a week for those who have hypothyroidism. The only thing you want to be mindful of, just like you would with any other food, is not consuming soy with your medications. All right, so let's talk about legumes and what the heck I mean when I say legumes. Okay. Um, so when I say legume, I'm talking about foods that are like beans, lentils, soybeans, peanuts, Peanuts are technically, like, botanically a legume, but we're gonna lump them in a different category for the sake of our nutrition conversation and focus on beans, peas, things like split peas, lentils, and soybeans. So all of these foods are lumped in the same category because when they're growing, they pull nitrogen from the atmosphere and fix it down into the soil, which is really cool because then that makes that nitrogen, which is a key component of plant growth, available for any plants that are coming behind them to grow well. So if you're in the Midwest, like I am, you see constant rotations of soy and corn in farm fields. The soybeans are planted in that rotation because they pull that nitrogen from the atmosphere, and then the corn is planted and can utilize that nitrogen in the soil. Okay, when we're thinking about serving sizes of our legumes, we're looking at about a half cup of cooked or a quarter cup of dipped. That's general. Again, you may need more or less depending on your age, activity level, and what else you have going on. So, why consume beans and lentils other than the fact that they are delicious? The cool thing about plant proteins is they have a host of other benefits beyond just providing us with that protein. And beans and lentils in particular are really powerhouses that are often lacking in the standard American diet. And they contain a lot of nutrients that are often lacking in the standard American diet. So, first and foremost, they have these polyphenols, which are plant compounds that act as antioxidants. So, I threw that word out there before, but I didn't really explain what that means. And in antioxidants, they prevent damage to our cells. So, you can think of the analogy of if you've ever cut an apple and then it's browned, that's oxidation. So, by putting lemon juice on it, an antioxidant, it prevents that browning from happening. So antioxidants do the same thing inside of our body, and by preventing that damage, they're helping prevent inflammation and promote health. Fiber, beans are chock full of fiber, especially soluble fiber. We're getting 8 grams of fiber per half cup of beans, and the dietary recommendations, we want to aim for about 30 grams of fiber every day. Varies a little bit depending on gender, but 30 grams is a good ballpark. Most Americans only get 15 grams of fiber every day. So beans and lentils can be a really great tool for upping your fiber content. And fiber is important because it helps lower our cholesterol. It helps us feel full. It helps us better control our blood sugar, and it is a critical component of cancer prevention, especially colon, breast, and prostate cancer. I also really appreciate beans and lentils because they are inexpensive. So they're delicious. They have all of these health benefits. And you can see by the chart on your screen here that they often are much less expensive than some of our animal-based protein counterparts. And I think that's especially important in kind of these tumultuous times with food prices increasing. Our beans and lentils typically stay fairly reasonably priced. So those are always there as an inexpensive protein option. And finally, when we're thinking about how our food choices impact the world around us, swapping animal proteins for plant proteins like beans and lentils is one of the best things we can do to positively influence planetary health. Greenhouse gas production from agriculture, but about 30% of it is due to animal agriculture. And animal agriculture uses most of the water that agriculture consumes. So by switching to beans and lentils, we're lessening our carbon footprint and decreasing the amount of non-renewable resources like fresh water that we're consuming. Okay, I have yacked a lot. We're gonna get cooking, and I'm going to give a couple of tips before we do that. So I promise you, we are getting to the food. We're almost there. A couple things that I want us to think through or talk through before we start cooking is one, how do we cook these beans and lentils from dry? We get asked a lot of questions about soaking. Do I need to soak my dry beans? And you don't have to. It can decrease your cooking time. If you're somebody who has gas after eating beans or you experience a lot of bloating, sometimes soaking and then discarding that soaking water can help decrease some of that GI distress. You're dissolving some of the starches that are causing that discomfort in the water, and then you're tossing it out so there's less in the beans. So it's really up to you. You don't have to soak them at all. I often don't because I forget, and then I just spend a little bit more time cooking the dry beans. I mentioned gas, and that is a real problem for a lot of people when it comes to eating beans. If that's you, the first thing I would encourage you to think about is going slow with beans. I mentioned they're really high in fiber and that most Americans only eat about 15 grams of fiber every day, even though our recommendations are upwards of twice that, right? So if your fiber intake's on the lower side, start by adding like a tablespoon or two of beans or lentils into your daily meal. And over the course of a few weeks, work your way up to a half a cup or a cup a day based on your tolerance. You can also trial different types of beans. Some folks respond better to like a garbanzo bean versus a kidney bean. Those are just examples, but just find the bean that works best for you and your body. And then you can also take some steps beyond that soaking to decrease the sugar that is responsible for some of that gas and bloating. It's called the raffinose, and humans lack an enzyme to break it down, and so sometimes it can cause gas and discomfort. If you cook your beans with sea vegetables like kombu, so that's like a dried seaweed, that contains that enzyme that breaks down the raffinose, and you're less likely to get gas. We talked about soaking. A step beyond soaking is sprouting. So when you can soak the beans, changing the water regularly until you start to see them crack and get their first little bit of a sprout coming out. That process of that bean plant starting to grow starts to degrade some of that raffinose because that is what that plant is using as fuel to start growing. So that's another strategy. When we're thinking about tools for cooking, stovetop versus Instapot or a pressure cooker cuts the time in half. Okay, so something to think about if you're wanting to incorporate a lot of dry beans. And then you can save time by using some quick cooking lentils or canned options, which we'll talk about now. Tonight, we have 3, maybe 4 recipes if we're snappy about it. Our first recipe is a lentil sloppy joe. And I love this recipe. It is a good crowd-pleasing recipe and something that you can scale up or scale down for a weeknight dinner or for when you're having a picnic or barbecue in your backyard. The recipe that you have on the website is for 8 to 12 servings. I'm making a half batch tonight. Okay, so that's more like 4 to 6 servings. We are going to start with an onion and a pepper. So we're going to talk through cutting those because I know I've done this before, but not everybody's been with us for every class. So to get to a diced onion, I'm going to lay this onion down on its side with its stem end pointing one direction and its root hairs pointing the other direction. And I'm going to slice off that stem end. I'm holding my knife pinched between my thumb and my first finger, with my remaining 3 fingers wrapped securely around the blade. Now that protects my wrist and it protects my elbow and it gives me better control and leverage. It might feel weird at first, but I encourage you to practice this grip because over time it will get more comfortable and it's gonna keep you safer. Okay, now I'm gonna cut. I've got the flat part of my onion down on the cutting board, my root hairs facing up. I'm going to cut through those root root hairs. I'm going to place my knife halfway on there, and I'm going to slice all the way down to the cutting board. Okay, so I'm just trying to get even halves of my onion. I'm going to now peel off the kind of limp and papery layers of the onion and add those into my compost bucket. And all right, now I'm going to follow the lines on my onion here. So I'm going to take the tip of my chef's knife. I'm going to leave about a finger's width that I'm not from the root end that I'm not cutting. And I'm going to keep my non-knife holding hand in a claw shape to keep my fingertips from getting cut. And I'm following these guidelines around the onion, angling my knife as I go around and slicing all the way down to the cutting board. So you can hear me kind of hitting that cutting board. Now I'm going to flip my knife the opposite direction and make thin cuts. This recipe calls for a small dice, okay? If you've ever had sloppy joes before, it's kind of like a messy, like crumbly, delicious assortment of things that you put on a burger bun. And so we want these veggies in small pieces so they're in the right bite size for us. Okay, so I've got my onion. Now I'm going to do a pepper. I've got it laying down outside again. I'm going to slice the top off, and I'm going to slice the bumpy bottom off. And I'm just trying to get to that flat surface. The onion is getting my eyes. So I can make slices, squared off slices around my pepper. And I'm trying to slice so that I'm keeping this white pith of the pepper attached to the seeds. I don't want that pith, and I don't want my seeds all over the place. So by slicing it that way, I'm saving myself a little bit of headache of having to pick seeds off of everything. Now I've got my pepper slices stacked on top of each other. I'm keeping the tip of my knife on the cutting board, and I'm making kind of a rocking motion. Okay, so think about pulling your elbow back, or like you're turning a crank backwards when you're making that slicing motion. And I'm making pretty thin slices because, again, I want these to be a small dice. So I'm gathering those sticks. I'm just making cuts the opposite direction. And you don't have to be perfect. The beauty about cooking is embrace the imperfections. If every piece is not exactly the same size, it might cook a little bit differently, but it'll still taste okay. So as long as they're close enough, you're fine. Don't stress out about it. Okay, so we're almost there. One more little bit, and I'm gonna get my skillet going over here. So I'm turning on my skillet, medium-high heat. Just gonna let that warm up for a second. And then we are going to get these onions and peppers into the mix. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not cutting the bottom of the pepper or the top, but please totally do that. It's great. It's good. We've got a tablespoon of olive oil. If you're concerned about your fat intake for heart health reasons, you could do a water saute here. Okay. So I'm going to add in my onions. I hear that sizzle. That means that was nice and warmed up. Adding my pepper. And I'm just going to flip my cutting board for cleaning sake and just give this a stir. So we're just going to cook this for 2 to 4 minutes until the onions start to get a little translucent and the peppers start to soften. Okay, so while that's going on, the main ingredient in this recipe is lentils. So these are green lentils, which look like this. Okay, green lentils, also called brown lentils. You know, some people think they are green, some people think they look brown. And then these are red lentils. Okay, so for this recipe, again, I'm making the half batch, so we did 1 cup of dry green lentils. That transforms into about 2 or 2.5 cups of cooked lentils. If you're choosing canned lentils, that would be about 1.5 to 2 cans of canned lentils for this recipe. I like going with the green lentils for this recipe as opposed to the red lentils, because the red lentils, they cook really fast. They cook in about 10 minutes and they kind of fall apart. So you get a uniform mixture, not dissimilar in texture to like a mashed potato. These hold their shape. You cook them in 2 parts water, or for more flavor, some vegetable broth, and then 1 part lentil. So for my 1 cup of dry lentils, I did 2 cups of broth, and then you cook them for about 15 to 20 minutes until they're soft and the water has absorbed. But they maintain their texture and shape, and I like that in this dish. If you like more uniformed consistency, you can replace the green lentils with the red lentils. Just cook it for less time. Okay, so my heat is up a little bit higher than I would like. I'm starting to get some browning that's bordering on burning, so I'm turning it down a little bit. And now what I'm going to do is add in a couple cloves. So we've got a couple cloves of minced garlic. That's going in here. And I'm just going to let that cook for about 30 seconds until it's fragrant. I don't like adding my garlic with the onions and pepper because I feel like it often burns. And when garlic burns, it gets bitter. And I don't want that bitterness in this dish. Okay, so we've got that in there, and now we're going to add in some spices and seasonings, combine everything. So let's talk through what we got here. So I have got a tablespoon of chili powder. That's going to go in here. And I like adding the spices to the vegetables while they're sauteing, because we're blooming them and bringing out some of the volatile oils. Got some cumin, a teaspoon of ground cumin, and a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper. Oh no, that was my smoked paprika. Sorry. And then if you want to add some cayenne pepper in here, about a pinch or 1/8 of a teaspoon of cayenne pepper. I have got a tablespoon and a half of maple syrup, and a couple tablespoons of coconut aminos. Coconut aminos are a soy sauce substitute. So they're a little bit lower in sodium, a little bit sweeter than a traditional soy sauce. Okay, now I'm going to add in, I've got 1 can of tomato sauce. So this is just a can. Meyer was the brand I went with this time, but you could choose another brand. This tomato sauce just has pureed tomatoes and then some Italian seasoning spices. So it's got onion powder, garlic powder, dehydrated bell pepper. That's it. If you don't have tomato sauce, but you have tomato paste, like a little jar of tomato paste, you could use a jar of tomato paste and a cup and a half of water. And then if you have some Italian seasoning, you could throw that in here as well. Okay, so now my last ingredient, my lentils, pouring those in here, giving that a nice stir. And what I'm going to do now is just let this cook for about 5 to 10 minutes until it's warmed all the way through and it's thickened up a little bit. Okay. This is also a nice recipe because you could add other veggies and other things in here if you wanted. You could shred some carrots, and when you're sauteing your onions and your pepper, you could throw in those shredded carrots, and that adds another colorful vegetable into this dish. You could chop up mushrooms and add that to your veggie saute, and that adds some more savoriness, umami, and a little bit more tooth to the dish as well. So lots of different directions you can go here. So I'm not going to make you wait with me for 5 to 10 minutes until this cooks all the way through. It looks pretty much the same once it gets to that point, but I want to show you what it looks like once we plate it all up. So I am going to move my skillet out of the way here. We've got a little bit more space for our other recipes. And then show you, this is that lovely, delicious lentil mixture. So I have lentil sloppy joe on a bun. This is a gluten-free bun, so that's why it looks a little pale, but you could use a whole wheat bun. You could put it on some whole grain bread. I like eating it sometimes with chips as a dip, served it that way as at a party. Lots of different options. You could serve it just with veggies as a dip, but really delicious, really easy. It keeps in the fridge for about 4 to 5 days, and you can freeze it for up to a month. When you do go to thaw it, you might want to add a little bit more water because it may have dried out in the freezing process. So that is our first recipe. Our next recipe, just going to clear some things out of the way for us. And I also want to make a note. I think one of the things that helps this class come together so well is we have everything measured out beforehand, right? And you can do that at home, and it's called mise en place, getting all your ingredients measured out in their place, and it makes things go so much faster when you're cooking. So highly encourage you to do that. One other thing, so oftentimes when you're buying that bag of lentils, it is a pound of lentils, so it's about 2 cups. If you cooked the whole bag, you might only need half for this recipe. What do you do with the others? You could throw them into pasta sauce. You could put it on top of a grain bowl. You could sub it in for taco meat, either 100% and use your same taco seasonings, or you could mix it half and half if you're still choosing to eat meat with whatever animal protein you're consuming. So lots of different options to be creative with the lentils. All right, we are moving on from lentils to canned beans. So this recipe that we're doing next is a black bean burger, and there are all sorts of different veggie burgers out there. This one I think is one of the best. It stays together really well. This is an adaptation of the American College of Culinary Medicine's veggie burger. We've made some changes to make it 100% plant-based and add some other fun ingredients like flaxseed that we'll talk about in a second. So it starts with 1 can of drained and rinsed black beans. 1 can of black beans is about 1.5 cups of black beans. So if you're cooking them from dry, you need about 1/2 cup of dry beans to get to this 1.5 cups of cooked lentils. Typically, the beans are sold by the pound. So 1 pound of dry beans is 2 cups of dry beans, and that will get you 6 cups of cooked beans if you cooked that whole thing. So do you see we're kind of magnifying our dry beans, increasing threefold. Okay, so again, this is 1 can of low sodium black beans. If you can't find low sodium, just drain and rinse your beans, and we're mashing. So I'm using a potato masher. You can use a fork. Don't have to have a potato masher to make this work. And I don't need this to be completely smooth, but I want to make kind of like a paste because this is going to help everything stick together and get that burger-like texture and consistency. So think like chunky refried beans. That's kind of the consistency we're going for. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to set that aside. And I realize I need a spatula. So our other ingredients, 3/4 cup of rolled oats. Okay, we've got 1/2 of a red bell pepper that was finely diced. Okay, again, small pieces, small bite-sized pieces. We've got 1/2 of a yellow onion, also finely diced. And then we've got some spices. So we've got 1/4 teaspoon of salt. You can totally omit that if you're watching your sodium intake. We have got a teaspoon of dried oregano, a quarter teaspoon of cayenne pepper for a little bit of heat. If you don't like spicy, go ahead and omit that. And then a couple teaspoons of cumin. And 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. So we're using garlic powder here. You could use 2 cloves of minced garlic if you want to use fresh. 1 clove of minced garlic is equal to half a teaspoon of garlic powder. All right, I'm going to mix this a little bit to get some things combined before I add our final ingredient. So our final ingredient is a flax egg. So flaxseed, just right here, this is flaxseed meal. So it's ground flaxseed. You can buy it in its whole form, and it's kind of teardrop shaped and flat and brown or golden. Either one works. We're using the meal here. If you're buying the meal, you want to store it in the fridge or store it in the freezer. Flaxseed is a great binder. It also is a source of those phytoestrogens that we talked about being present in the soy. There's another phytoestrogen called lignans that are found in our flaxseed. So we're getting some of those same health benefits that we talked about earlier from our flax. They're also a good source of anti-inflammatory omega-3 fatty acids. So they're adding a lot of good stuff and they're helping this burger stick together. So you can see it's kind of goopy, just like an egg when it's mixed together is, or kind of like the white is. To make a flaxseed egg, 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed meal plus 3 tablespoons of water. You whisk it together and then you let that sit for about 5 minutes, okay? So now we're mixing this all together until everything is uniformly spread out. All right. Almost there. It smells really good. When I first made this recipe, I was like, that's a lot of cumin, because cumin can be a pretty powerful spice. Some people think it's really stinky. You can see also when I'm mixing, I'm kind of mashing a little bit more as I'm mixing here to help, again, get to a consistency where everything's going to stick together. But back to the cumin. I think that amount actually really makes this burger kind of smoky and have some of the qualities people often look for in a burger. It's like really rich in its depth of flavor, which I think makes it hold up to a lot of the typical burger toppings that you might be used to, which is pretty nice. So now what we do, this recipe makes 6 burgers. So you want to kind of divide your mixture into 6 balls. So I typically like divide it in half, and then I'll try to divide those sections that into like thirds to get to my pieces. So I'm going to put on gloves because I don't have the luxury of washing my hands real quick after this. You could totally use your clean hands. And we're going to bake these burgers. So these burgers are great. They tend to still crumble apart a little bit on the grill. So my preference is to bake them either in my convection oven, my toaster oven, or my oven, depending on the time of year. So I made a ball, and now I'm flattening that ball into a patty. I'm going to put it on a sheet tray lined with parchment paper to prevent it from sticking. Okay, I'm going to put all of these on the tray, evenly spaced out. I'm going to bake this at 350 degrees for 12 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes. Then I'm going to flip it and bake it for another 10 to 12 minutes on the other side. Okay. Then you let it cool for a couple minutes, take it out of the oven, place it on your favorite type of burger bun with your favorite toppings. We chose some mustard, some spinach, and a yummy red pepper slice here, and then have a little side salad and a pickle to go with it. This is a really satisfying burger. I think even a lot of folks who are ardent meat lovers really enjoy this burger. You can also eat it on, you don't have to have it in kind of sandwich burger form. I've eaten it on top of a bed of brown rice, and that's really delicious. It's also, if you're a mushroom person, if you enjoy mushrooms, some sauteed mushrooms on top of it are also really delicious. Can recommend. So there's your veggie burger. They do freeze well. If you make the patties and then you freeze them with a layer of parchment paper in between, or wax paper in between each burger so they don't stick together, makes thawing them easier, and you can easily reheat them again in the oven or your toaster oven. Our black bean burger. All right. We're still on black beans, and we're gonna do something that's maybe a little surprising. We're gonna make a dessert. I have two favorite dessert recipes with beans. The first are these brownies, and then I'll talk about another one when we move on to our next bean. So I started with 1 can again of black beans and mashed them. We already mashed beans together, so I didn't feel like you needed to watch me do that again. So again, that's 1.5 cups of cooked beans. This is low sodium black beans, drained and rinsed. I've got a 1/4 cup of 100% cocoa. This is dark chocolate, which we're getting some theobromine in there, which is a really potent antioxidant. I've got a 1/2 cup of oat flour, so some nice soluble fiber, whole grain. And then I've got a 1/4 cup of avocado oil, 1/2 cup of maple syrup. You wouldn't want to sub like a granulated, like a dry sugar here, because we really need the liquid of that maple syrup to help pull everything together. I've got a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. So I'm going to mix all of this together with my whisk. I've also used a fork before if you don't have a whisk, and that seems to be just fine. If you can't find oat flour, or you don't want to buy oat flour, but you already have oatmeal, you could use quick cook oats in this recipe. Or what I did tonight was I used a spice grinder that I have dedicated for flaxseed and grains, and I ground some rolled oats to make my oat flour. All right, so I'm just mixing this until everything is combined and I'm not seeing any weird streaks where the cocoa powder is not mixed in, or white streaks where my baking powder isn't mixed in. And you can see this is kind of the texture of batter that I'm looking for. So it's kind of thick and sticky. Okay? When you're making brownies, that's what you're going for. It's kind of that thick, sticky texture. All right, so I'm going to get rid of batter that's stuck in whisk. And now I'm going to, oh, you know what? I did miss it. One very important ingredient. So this is vanilla extract, 2 teaspoons. And we want that because it's enhancing the sweetness of this dish without having to add even more sugar to it. So even though there's black beans in here, there is a good deal of maple syrup. So these are a dessert, right? They're just a dessert that has a little bit more added fiber and a very fun surprise ingredient. Okay, so we got that vanilla mixed in there. Now I've got 1/2 cup of chocolate chips. Do not skip the chocolate chips. They really do make this brownie that much better. You could also throw other mix-ins in here if you like walnuts or shredded coconut. That could be something delicious in here, or cacao nibs, which is raw chocolate. All right, we've got that all mixed together. I'm putting it into an 8x8, so 8 inches by 8 inches greased pan. You could also throw down some parchment paper in here to prevent it from sticking if you don't want to add more oil. And now I am going to just spread that out into an even layer. When you serve this recipe, because I know you're all going to make it, when you serve it, just don't tell anybody there's black beans in it before you serve it to them, because I would say 80% of the time, most people are like, ew, black beans. I'm not going to eat those brownies. But if you don't tell them and they eat them, they won't even know and they love them. So I'm usually not a fan of being sneaky around food, but you could do a little experiment and maybe tell some people, not tell others, and see what kind of reactions you get in your household. All right, so there, it's evenly spread out. So this is what it looks like before going into the oven. We're baking it at 350 for about 15 to 20 minutes. We put it in, ding, 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 15, 20 minutes has gone by. And here we go. Here's our beautiful, delicious black bean brownie. Okay, ready to go with your lentil sloppy joes for your next party. Okay, we have a few minutes still, so I am going to move on to our next recipe. So this recipe calls for canned chickpeas. 1 can of canned chickpeas. Again, that would be about 1.5 cups of cooked chickpeas. So if you're making them from dry, about a 1/2 cup of dried chickpeas is what you're starting with. Before we make this, I did say that there's one other dessert that I like that is bean-based, and that is a chickpea cookie dough. So it's something we make with our kids in our kids cooking class, and it's chickpeas and a nut butter and a little bit of maple syrup, vanilla, and then you fold in some chocolate chips, and it is just like those black bean brownies. Everybody's like, chickpeas, I don't know. But it is the kids' favorite recipe that we make in class. It does taste like cookie dough. That's not what we're making. We're gonna make a chickpea mock tuna salad. So we're gonna start with this can of chickpeas. This is a really great fast lunch option, or a 10-minute dinner option. I'm gonna move my camera so you get a little bit better. There you go. Okay, so I'm just gonna mash. Again, I'm not going for smooth, kind of like the black bean burgers. I just want everything to stick together a little bit. So just mashing until about 2/3 of the chickpeas are mashed. And if you want it to be smoother, you mash more. If you don't care, mash less. It's up to you. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. And now I'm going to mix in my ingredients. So I've got 3 tablespoons of tahini. Tahini is ground sesame seeds, high in calcium. So this is a good plant-based source of calcium, and some healthy fat. It also is a really good tool in the plant-based kitchen for adding creaminess if you don't want to add dairy products. So a lot of like salad dressings that I want kind of that creamy consistency to, I'll either use tahini or an avocado base. So 3 tablespoons of my tahini. I've got a teaspoon of Dijon mustard. I've got a tablespoon of maple syrup for a hint of sweetness. I have a teaspoon of capers. So these are capers. You can see those okay. Maybe that camera will be better. Those are capers. The capers are a bud of a plant, and they're adding some saltiness and a little bit of that savoriness. If you don't have capers, you can't find them in your grocery store, some chopped up green olives would add the same kind of flavor profile here. And if you're concerned about sodium, this is really not adding that much, but you can totally omit them as well. We have got a pinch of salt and a pinch of black pepper. Typically, when recipes say a pinch, it's about 1/8 of a teaspoon or slightly less. Okay. We've got 4 or 5 green onions that were thinly sliced, a stalk of celery, thinly diced, a 1/4 cup of pickle. diced. It's like a dill pickle. Vlasics makes this purely pickle line that doesn't have any weird dyes or a ton of added sugar. That's not the only brand that's out there. That's one that we can find readily here in our community. So that's the one I try to go for. And then a couple tablespoons of sunflower seeds, unsalted, unroasted. You could use pumpkin seeds here. You could chop up walnuts, whatever kind of nut you'd like. Having that crunch is a nice texture variation to the soft chickpeas and some of the other things in this dish. So highly recommend adding something crunchy in there. All we do is mix this around. And again, I'm going to kind of mash a little bit with the back of my spatula as I go. And voila, there you go. You have your 5-minute lunch, your chickpea mock tuna salad. I love this with just whole grain crackers. I'll pack, a cup or more of this and some whole grain crackers and a bag of baby carrots. And that is like a fast, I'm running out the door lunch for me. Also great between a couple slices of whole grain bread on top of a salad. Lots of options and possibilities here. So there you go. We made it through 4 recipes, and all 4 of those recipes are on the class website. And I'm going to pull up a QR code so that you can see. So on the left-hand side of your screen is the QR code for the class resource site. So that website has all the recipes. It is where the recording of tonight's class will live. It takes about a week to get the recordings up there. And it has some more resources. So we have some handouts and links to other sites about cooking beans. There's a great video there as well. And then the QR code on your right-hand side of the screen, if you're interested in learning more about lifestyle medicine, which I talked about at the beginning of this class, we do have a free 30-minute class that alternates between afternoon and evening times that anybody can join to learn a little bit more about lifestyle medicine and some of the other classes that we offer to further your education in that space. So those are the QR codes. There's also links there. And then I will be sending a follow-up email after class that contains these links as well as link to a resource that I love. If you're really excited about beans, maybe you could tell that I'm really excited about beans. I've recently become a bean aficionado. I adore them. And something that has helped me fall in love with them even more is a cookbook called The Bean Book from Rancho Gordo. Again, I don't get anything from that company. I'm not necessarily endorsing that company necessarily, but that cookbook is a lot of fun and highly encourage checking that out from the library if you want to fall in love with beans like I have. All right, with that, I will stop there and let you get on with the rest of your evening. Thank you so much, as always, for joining me in the Cooking with Plants class. I hope to see you next month when we talk all about plant proteins and soy foods. And I look forward to seeing you then. Happy cooking!